Welcome back, David Curry.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir, so much. We greatly appreciate your comments. Hope you're enjoying your meal. We have a wonderful panel discussion here with a couple of superstars in the world of human rights, if that's the right phrase for it, but people who have deep influence and knowledge about what's going on around the world. Our first panelist is Dr. Katrina Lantos Swett. She is the president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice, established to continue the legacy of her father, Congressman Tom Lantos, as many of you know his story. And she's also the former chair and vice chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Would you welcome Dr. Lantos Swett, please? Thank you so much for coming. By now, you are also all knowledgeable about Ambassador Sam Brownback, so maybe this is not necessary, but let's introduce him anyway. He's the former Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, the former governor of Texas, U.S. Senator, and just has a... Kansas. What did I say, Texas? Sam, you're going to have to change your address. Back me up on this. So I'm just glad you all are awake and paying attention. And he just has a long track record on promoting human rights in U.S. foreign policy. Would you welcome Ambassador Sam Brownback?
I think I might have sat in your seat. Does that
Well, wonderful. Thank you both for coming out here. We want to have an informal conversation about a very serious subject, and I'll start with you. Your father, Congressman Lantos, was a hero to me and to many other people. How did his story, but also the way he lived his life, public life and private life, influence where you are today as you are taking up this mantle and have taken it up?
Oh, well, it's such a wonderful question. As you know, but perhaps not all of your luncheon guests know, my dad was the only survivor of the Holocaust ever elected to serve in the United States Congress. And there's just no doubt that the incredibly painful and searing experiences of his youth made him particularly sensitive to what it meant to be targeted, to be persecuted, to be hunted, simply because of your faith or who you were. And so he became a great champion for human rights. He was the co-founder of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, a great supporter of international religious freedom. And I'm tempted to share very quickly a story that was shared with me by someone who experienced this with him from his youth, because I really think it played a role in his eventual passion for defending the conscience rights of others. So my dad, as a young teenager in Budapest, was rounded up with all the other young Jewish boys and taken to a slave labor camp outside of the capital, where they lived under pretty brutal conditions, although this was not an extermination camp, it was a slave labor camp. And for whatever reason, the commander of the particular barracks that my father and his friend were in decided to kind of burnish, if you will, his reputation by forcing all the boys in his barracks to be converted, to be baptized.
Okay.
And you know, my dad was not actually a particularly religious young Jewish boy at that time, young man. But there was something in him that understood that if he allowed, under these horrible circumstances, this overriding of his own conscience, his own freedom, his own will to take place, that he would lose something very, very precious in that process. All of the boys agreed to be baptized, with the exception of my father and this one friend of his.
Wow.
And they were badly beaten for their refusal. But I sort of like to think that, in a way, this core of courage he had about defending the conscience rights of others began to take form in that very difficult, very grim, but very formative moment in his life.
So it started young for him. When did it take hold in your life as you began to realize this is not just something that my dad lived, it's something I believe in?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I think growing up, he was a very forceful personality, as his former friend and colleague, Ambassador Brownback, can attest. And my mother is actually an equally forceful personality. She is a dynamic, gorgeous, amazing Hungarian, happens to be a cousin of the Gabors, you know, Zsa
really?
and Eva Gabor, but we thought she was more beautiful than her glamorous cousins. But they were such a powerful influence on me. I think my sister and I both kind of not only got it a little bit in our DNA, but certainly breathed it in around the dinner table, just in our circumstances, and seeing our parents live lives dedicated to fighting for human rights. And so it's been a very natural progression, but I will say that when I was given the tremendous opportunity of serving on USCIRF, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, sort of my depth of understanding about the dimensions of the challenge was greatly enhanced. And so it's become a real guiding force in my life.
That's wonderful. Now, Sam, when did you first realize that you were the governor of Texas?
We've always thought of Texas as a southern county of Kansas, so that's kind of, it's just been going with being a Kansan, Texas that way.
You could have picked any number of subjects in your public service to dive in on. Why religious freedom?
I've wondered that sometimes myself, but and then when I look back on it, my mother was born in the house and on the property where John Brown would stay in Osawatomie, Kansas. John Brown, the famous abolitionist that lit the fire on the Civil War. When the Battle of Osawatomie loses one of his sons and declares 10 years before the Civil War, there will not be peace in this land until the issue of slavery is resolved. So maybe it was just in the soil that was there. But I started hearing about these cases when I was first in the United States Senate. I had a staff member, Sharon Pate, fabulous on this topic. She was saying these people are being held in Central Asian prisons for simply being a minority faith. And I said, that's wrong, that's terrible. Let's do something. And so we started writing letters. And then I remember one night, I'm at home in Kansas at a softball game for one of my kids, and I get a call from Sharon. She says, we just got somebody out of jail. They just got free. We'd written letters, we'd pushed this, and I think I was hooked at that time. I thought, wow, we can actually do something here. And I run into some people, even around Washington still, that, well, you advocated for me, and I'm out and I'm free. Yeah. And I thought, wow, that's hard to beat that kind of work if you can keep somebody alive or get them out of jail that's simply in jail for trying to peacefully practice their faith. That's all I'm trying to do.
Right.
And they're such beautiful, honorable people. I consider it such a great constituency to be a voice for the voiceless and the downtrodden and the imprisoned, the persecuted.
That's wonderful. Now, I guess the next way of asking this is to say, when you came in as the ambassador for religious liberty, you knew a lot about the subject. What is the one or two things that you know now, sitting here, that you did not know 4 or 5 years ago? The things you've seen, the experiences, the people you've talked to, that even blossomed your already significant knowledge on this subject in some sort of meaningful way?
You know, I think what really blossomed for me was the notion, and we're starting to see it take place, that we could move religious freedom from a kind of a boutique topic to a major foreign policy issue. And indeed, I believe that this topic, handled properly, can really reduce the clash of civilizations around the world. This topic, handled improperly or poorly or not addressed at all, will lead to a further clash of civilizations. And here I'm talking about civilizations are often built upon a major religion. And one religious group saying, we don't like this minority religious group. And we can stop genocides if we will protect the minorities, because the genocides of the last century, most of them have been of a religious minority. Whether it's the Jewish Holocaust, or it's the Yazidis, or the Christians in northern Iraq, or the Rohingya, or it's the Uyghurs, they're all of a religious minority. So I was looking, and the thing I didn't see before, but I see now is this is a major piece of foreign policy that if we can get this right, we can move forward with a lot more peace and security and economic opportunity and freedom for the whole world.
Wow. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, that deserves some applause. Katrina, when you look around the map, I mean, what are some of the places that trouble you the most?
Well, sadly, there are way too many of them. I think one has to say, simply because of the size of China and the numbers of faith communities that are being horribly targeted and persecuted in China, I think I would put China at the top of the list. You have, of course, what's happening to the Uyghurs. You have the persecution of the house church movement. You have the horrific abuse of the Falun Gong community.
Yes.
You have the oppression of the Tibetan Buddhists. One can go on. There are other communities as well. And obviously what's happening in Hong Kong, not specifically about religious freedom, although some of our luncheon guests may be interested to know that many, many of the leaders of the Hong Kong democracy movement happen to be themselves devout Christians. So China, because of its immensity, because of its power, and quite honestly, because the world is shamefully afraid to take on China, we are much, much too reluctant, in my humble opinion, to confront China about its massive human rights abuses. So I think you would have to put China somewhat at the top of the list. Thank you. North Korea is one of the darkest places in the world when it comes to utter oppression and persecution of people of faith. Then we have countries, some of them important American allies on other issues, but not places that are welcoming to religious freedom, places like Saudi Arabia. And you know, the Middle East in general has countries where we see enormous pressure, some of that pressure being brought to bear on literally the original ancient Christian communities, the place where Christianity began, where it took its life, and we see now communities under incredible threat there. And you, of course, and your, fabulous organization know that so well. But it is really troubling to say that there are so many places in the world that we can look. Nigeria is a country that struggles with terrible issues around religious freedom. Boko Haram is a dangerous, violent group that is threatening a country that could be a model of coexistence. Nigeria is a fascinating country, almost 50-50 Muslim-Christian. It could be such an exemplar in so many ways, but sadly, that is not now the case. So the problems are enormous and widespread.
Going back to China, what would be some broad strokes of how would you address, how do we address this? I mean, they're sort of, have a strong position. They feel like they can just hold out and do whatever they want to do within their. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but that's where.
I don't have a problem actually with being put on the spot. I think that we have to have the courage of our convictions. We really do. We have to be willing to confront China on the issue of religious freedom and human rights more broadly. We all recognize China is not just a rising superpower, but a risen superpower. It is very clearly and very intentionally and very openly now challenging to be sort of the world hegemon, if you will. And people can have all sorts of debates about this, that, or the other. But at the end of the day, what distinguishes us and what is our strength in confronting a rival, if you will, like China, are our values, are our beliefs, are the precepts that set us apart from every other superpower in history, really, if you look back over the scope of history. So, you know, China, I happen to believe, is weaker than the rest of the world guesses, because whenever you have a government that is not predicated on the underlying consent of the governed, when it is an authoritarian, brutal dictatorship, it may appear very strong, but it is fragile.
Right.
So I think we should recognize there are plenty of areas where we have to work together, and we will work together. And other areas where we'll just be rivals, but then there will have to be areas where we show the courage of our conviction and are ready to stand up strongly, and that's religious freedom, human rights.
That's beautiful. Yes. Now, Sam, I'm going to give you a tricky situation. Here we have the country of India, which on our research shows is the 10th most difficult place. It's a gigantic democracy. So many ways we're friends, the love of between the cultures, between the people. But here you have this unusual situation where you have this rise of attacks on religious minorities within India. How do we begin to unravel that and address it in a way, really with our friends, their partners in so many ways? How do we tackle that?
You know, I think we've got to get back to the basics on this one again. I mean, obviously it's one of our convictions, but you're seeing this in a number of countries, this rise of religious nationalism, where the dominant religion in a country and enterprising politicians would look at and say, you know what, there is a real vein of political support here if I really get behind the Hindus. And we try to favor this or that, and they may not do anything in government policies, but there may be then a lot of communal activity or violence that really comes against people. And I think that's where we've got to back up again and say, guys, all right, let's rethink this. This is why you have to have religious freedom for everybody, everywhere, it's all the time. Because if you don't, these sort of situations come up. And we've seen it in the Balkans for a number of years, where you get one religious group would take on another one. And oftentimes it's the religion is the impetus that's used to motivate people to anger and activity, when the religion itself calls for peace and it calls for love. But then it becomes a matter of division, and so you get a spirit of division taking place and of religion instead of faith, and off we go. And then you see all the violence and division and difficulty. But if you would back up and say, no. Religious freedom, it means you protect your religious minorities, and they have these fundamental human rights, these fundamental, in my belief, God-given human rights that have to be protected. And if we don't do that, we're going to see the growth and rise of this. And it'll be India today, it'll be some other place tomorrow, because kind of the nature of what happens in a fallen world.
Right.
And if I could just add, you know, I think when we look around the world at how stressful the situation is for freedom of religion and conscience and belief, I am often brought to a point of great gratitude to our founding fathers, and that brilliant notion embodied in just a few words in the First Amendment that on the one hand protected the free exercise of religion, and I love that word exercise because it implies robustness. It's not you just have the freedom to worship, quietly go off and do it. You get to exercise your faith, but coupled with the Establishment Clause, which sort of created a separation between nationalism, the functions of state, and the world of faith. And I happen to think it was the secret sauce in America's founding, and you know has made our experiment in religious liberty so extraordinarily successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to get a couple of questions in here real quick, but they're not going to be easy questions. Jumping off of that, everybody here has a political pod they may tend to sit in, and we all get, you know, algorithms that feed us the same stories over and over and over again. What can we all do in this room to make religious freedom a truly bipartisan issue? Because it should be. I think everybody on the right and left understand that, but too often it's still segmenting. What can we do? I'll start with you and then go to Sam.
It's a tough question. You know, I just finished teaching a course at Tufts University the past semester on international religious freedom. And it was so interesting to see my students on the first day of class versus our last day of class, and I was lucky to be able to teach it in person. Because there was a lot of skepticism and a lot of people who clearly viewed the term religious freedom in scare quotes, you know, that,
right.
And we all understand that dynamic. I think that it is helpful for us in a way to separate out the domestic fights over the cause of international religious freedom, because they are somewhat different. We do have robust protections. We have a constitution that is second to none. We have mechanisms in this country for sort of trying to work through the religious freedom issues that arise domestically. But internationally, as we have seen, as the first plenary showed, we are dealing with genocide, with state-sponsored persecution, with complete marginalization of communities. Take the Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan, and those must not be partisan issues. We must be able to come together because they are human rights at the most fundamental and basic level. So I think those of us involved in advocating for international religious freedom, we do well to remind our domestic partners this is on a whole different magnitude of seriousness from the little and not so little fights we have domestically. And those are important, and we will battle those out, but we can come together to fight for the vulnerable, for the persecuted, and for our principles in the international arena.
Beautiful. Sam, you've lived this. You reach out across the aisle. I mean, and you have a position that's clear.
And he was a phenomenal ambassador at
Amazing.
large. By the
Amazing.
way, can we recognize what extraordinary work he did?
How do you do it? How do you see it?
Yeah, I think you got to work at it. You know, kind of half of politics is showing up. And so, you know, part of it's just saying, look, I need you here and I need you to show up.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not interested in this, or yeah, I think you guys slide too much this way or you go too much that way. Okay, whatever. I did bills with Paul Wellstone and Ted Kennedy, both who've passed away. Paul in a tragic accident and Ted of cancer. You know, and I was on the right as far as they were on the left. Matter of fact, Paul Wellstone, just a quick funny story. He came on the floor one day yelling at me. He said, "You did this to me." And I said, "What?" He said, "I was just ranked the second most liberal member of the Senate, and I used to be first, and it's because I've been working with you." And I said, "Yeah, hang around me, Paul. I'll get you reelected." And I went to his funeral, which, I mean, he and his wife were killed in a tragic accident. We did the first human trafficking bill together. That's what we did together. Awesome. And God bless that movement that's led to a lot more freedom of people. But I think you got to pick the topic narrowly, too.
Sure.
There was a lot of things in that first human trafficking bill and in these religious freedom bills that people wanted to add in. You said, my team doesn't support that. You say, okay, we won't put it there. So instead of ending up with 100% of what you want, you end up with 40% of what you want, but so does the other person. And then you got actually something that you can do. And I think that's what we've got to do, is we just got to say, there are places that we don't agree. Just don't agree. But that doesn't mean we focus on those. We say, well, that's what do we agree on? And so here you've got a summit with 70 plus different groups from all the major religions, political parties back and forth on both sides of it, and a very narrow topic: religious freedom for everybody, everywhere, all the time. So the bigger the coalition, the more narrow the topic. Often is what you have to do, and I think that's going to be a key for us moving forward to maintain the bipartisan nature of it. And then again, I want to double back to this because I really think we need to elevate the issue broadly in the foreign policy community, because this is a top-tier key issue to get right, and if you get it wrong, we have lots of ramifications down the pipe.
Right. 1 minute for each of you here. Last question, Sam. One place where you're optimistic about what's happening around religious freedom?
Central Asia. I think we're seeing some real breakthroughs and opportunities happening there, and I'm actually think we've got some real possibilities within the Middle East. Just the leadership meetings I'm having people, they're looking, we need to move this route and move forward there. If we're going to have an open and growing society and economy, we've got to accommodate people that may not think faith community the way we do.
How would you answer that?
Oh, it's a very good question. I also see some glimmers of hope in the Middle East. I think that in a way, some of the progress we saw through the Abraham Accords, which are more in the political arena, do also open up space for progress around shared Abrahamic faiths and shared respect. And I do think one thing I found, and I experience it here in this fabulous summit with people from so many faith communities, that when you are together with people of sincere conviction, there's a feeling of shared brotherhood and sisterhood, which is not based on a common theology. You said in your remarks, we're not looking for a common theology, but a common recognition that people have sought after truth and have found truth and are willing to live lives of integrity in pursuit of the truth that they believe. And that builds a basis for shared love and affection and respect. And I do see some glimmers of hope for that in the Middle East.
Thank you so much. Would you please give them a hand? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, David.
Thank you.